Thank you very much. I have a rule when Lauren calls me, emails me, asks me to do something, I just say yes, and then look at my calendar to figure out how I'm going to make that work. I think this is a brilliant program. I get called on a lot to, different titles for kinds of talks that I do, but usually somewhere under the rubric of tell us the secret. Tell us how to get our children into the college that we most want them to go to. And when I saw the topic for this conversation, it was one that I absolutely wanted to do, because I do think that we spend far too much time worrying as parents about the getting in piece. And we ought to be spending more time thinking about how we put our children in a position so that they're going to thrive when they are in college. I do have a sophomore boy. How many of you have 15-year-old boys in the room? Yeah, it's hard. For those of you who have older boys, it all turns out okay in the end, I hope. And there's certainly no question that being a parent impacts the work that I do around college enrollment and in supporting young people on my campus. And it's also absolutely the case that my professional life and what I see in working with young people impacts who I am as a parent and how I approach parenting. I do not claim in any way whatsoever to be an expert on parenting. I have a sample of one. Most days it seems to be going pretty well. Also, in terms of full disclosure, my wife is a college counselor. So she is Lauren at Hawken School in the Cleveland suburbs. So you can imagine how much fun my house is for my son. A lot of what happens in my professional life impacts my view as a parent. And we like to think about college as this happy, wonderful, terrific place. It is for a lot of students. It's not for a lot of other students. We see students who fail. We don't admit anybody to the university who we don't think has the ability to come and really thrive in our environment. And yet, every year we see students who fail as college students. And often it's a shock. I'm often asked when somebody is struggling, is there something in the application where we should have known this? And the answer is usually no. No hint. Incredibly well prepared, engaged in their high school communities, exactly the kind of student that we want. And we see some common themes in the students who don't make it. One central theme is students who can't handle independence. And I think as parents, that's really, really important because they go off to college and, we're shocked at the number of students for whom it's their first time away from home for a sustained amount of time. They haven't had the independence of decision making that they have in college previously. Nobody tells them to do their homework. Nobody tells them to go to class. And you would think that it would be obvious that those are things that one ought to do, but not always. Sometimes it leads to very bad things, with drug problems, alcohol problems. And it's easy as a parent to say, oh, but that's not my kid. I've seen this enough to be terrified that it will be my kid, because it's always the parents who are facing these challenges who never thought that they would be in that position. Gaming is a huge issue on college campus, huge issue that contributes to very, very significant mental health problems. We see students who lack the ability to self-advocate for themselves, which is an enormous challenge when you're on your own having to navigate college and the complexities. Students who don't listen to advice. And that, as a parent, you can help them. You can help them to listen to their teachers, listen to their advisors at school, support teachers, support advisors as people who are experts and ought to be listened to. Students who can't handle failure. This is a huge issue on my campus where, they take their first calc test and, they get a D. And it's an experience they've never had before in their life, and they have no idea how to cope with that and how to rectify that situations. We see students who are in college for their parents rather than being there for themselves. I cannot tell you how many times I have conversations with students and I'll ask them, why is it you're studying engineering? Why is it that you want to go to medical school? And the answer is, well, I don't, but my parents do. And therefore, that's what they're doing. And that's a challenge when you're doing something for your parents as an 18, 19, 20-year-old. Mental health challenges on college campuses are, at a crisis level. The number of students dealing with depression, dealing with eating disorders. There isn't a college campus in this country where the vice president of student affairs, when they get a phone call in the middle of the night, isn't filled with dread because they're terrified that one of the young people that they are responsible for has taken their own life. And again, as a parent, you think, oh, but that's not my kid. That's what every parent who finds themselves in that horrific situation feels. All of these things impact kind of my outlook and how I think, and I think how my wife thinks about our roles as parents. What we see in our own communities and the experiences that we've had also have an incredible impact. The 2014-2015 academic year was a really, really tough year. At Case Western Reserve, we had 4 boys, 2 first-year students on their very first day of class go up in a small plane, and the plane crashed and the boys died, all 4 of them. And as the perfect, sarcasm noted, bookend to that year, my wife, Hawken School had 4 boys in May in a car crash, and 2 of those boys died. And two boys who were seniors going off to college, both of them, the families had worked with my wife. And when you see the range of things that we see in our professional lives, where my son goes to college is way down the list of things that we think about in terms of what's important to us. I will guarantee you that the parents of those 6 boys could care less where their kids were going to college, what they would give up to have those boys back in terms of college selection. It puts things in perspective. Renee and I very consciously, as parents, decided that our goal was not to raise the perfect college applicant. Between the 2 of us, we know a lot. And we could have started when he was 3. That would have been way too late. Yeah, I'm sorry. We could have started, in utero to make sure that he was having the experiences that would prepare him perfectly to apply to and get into the college of our dreams. And instead, we've made decisions that, quite honestly, we know put him in a less good position in terms of college choice. He's at Hawken. Twice we looked at other alternatives for him. And quite honestly, there's another school in the area that probably would be a better fit for him academically. It's a boys' school. I think he would have benefited as a boy from the kind of structure that they have. And yet we consciously made the decision twice to keep him at Hawken because of the non-academic things that were going on and the kind of personal development, character development that he was getting out of being a part of that community, which to us seemed significantly more important than, is he going to get, 2 more A grades in courses with the right designations to make him, more competitive for college. Our mantra, and we constantly say this to each other, our goal is not to raise, the best high school student, the best college applicant, but, our goal is to raise a young man who's going to be a great 35-year-old. Not just because we will be retired and looking for some outside support at that time, but that's really, it's the long game here. And somehow, when it comes to the college process, we all go crazy and forget about being good parents and start focusing on that short game. One of the things that I fundamentally believe through my work is we cannot change who our children are. And that may seem incredibly fatalistic and depressing, but I honestly believe that kids are who they are, and no matter how much you try to change them, and I've seen the results of epic battles between parent and kid. Guess who wins? Every single time. And I know you want to think it's you. They always win. And so we have to kind of embrace who our children are. We cannot change them, but it's our job as parents to kind of poke around the edges and help mold and shape and perhaps give a gentle nudge now and then to help them along. So some very practical things in terms of how we approach parenting, and there are some very obvious things. We do not allow the telephone. This thing does not go in the bedroom. Not allowed upstairs. And I'm shocked at the number of his friends, who the phone goes with them everywhere. And friends will say, well, gee, but how do you get him to give it to you? And I'm just, I'm always baffled by that. It's like, we actually don't give him a choice on that. We're very clear. It's give it here. He doesn't have a computer in his room. He actually, when he does his homework either at the dining room table or at a table that's in our living room. That's where he does it. That's where his computer is. Not because we're checking over his shoulder every 5 minutes to see what he is doing, but we know when you put a teenage boy in a public space and he's working on his homework, it's a lot more likely he's doing his homework than if he were up in his bedroom on his computer doing that. He doesn't have an Xbox in his room, and we've been very deliberate when he became kind of computer gaming age. I was at Caltech at that time and saw firsthand what gaming addictions did to young people, most typically young men, and we rarely let him play the Xbox by himself. When he was younger, he only played video games with other people. That sometimes meant mom and dad got roped into playing video games. But it was a social experience. It was not a solitary experience. And I've had to kind of wrap my head around this idea now with the kind of online gaming. When he wants to go play Xbox, our question is, well, who are you playing with? So that he connects with one of his friends and they're playing together. And it's wild to, kind of overhear the conversations that they're having where they're often playing the game and having conversations about things that are completely different. Sleep. We have a huge problem with adolescence and sleep in this country. Huge problem. Again, not an expert, but I think it has a lot to do with the mental health challenges. I mean, young people's brains are simply not designed to work on 5 and 6 hours of sleep. And the college process and what parents believe colleges are looking for, I think, contribute mightily to this, because you've got students who were in activities after school until 8 o'clock. They get home, hopefully they eat something, and then they're doing homework until 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning before they start all over again. Make your children sleep. Our son and his friends make fun of him, and we tell him, I don't care, because he's in bed and asleep by 10 o'clock on a school night. And he's somebody who needs his sleep. Around the college process, we've really micromanaged his extracurricular activities. We gave one direction. You are not coming home after school. Not happening. Find something of substance. We don't care what it is. And you should, you want your children to do things that they love to do. If somebody is doing something because it's going to look good on the college application, it's a really lousy reason to do it. And colleges, we know the things that kids love to do. They tell us, their teachers tell us. There's a difference in way students approach things because it's drudgery, and when people do things because there's something that they love. And there's a very simple, kind of on the application, most institutions use the common application. We don't not only ask students, what do you plan on, what did you do when you were in high school? But then we ask them, do you plan on continuing this in college? I always wonder about the young people that I see who've spent, hours and hours and hours, year after year after year pursuing music. And then when they see the box, do I plan on doing this in college? No. And I wonder, gosh, why? If it's something you love, surely you would continue doing music in college. And if it's not something you love, why have you spent so much time, and at what cost? What might you have been doing with that time? Don't fight your children's battles, whether that be with teachers or with coaches. My son plays soccer, and if you stand after a soccer game and see which parents are fighting to talk to the coach, which parents whose child perhaps didn't get enough playing time. My son, of course, thinks that we are horrible, mean parents, because our answer, if he doesn't get enough playing time, and it has been since he was a small child, if he was unhappy about something, was, well, work harder, Or if you want to have a conversation with the coach, you go have the conversation with the coach. And if you want to have a conversation with the coach, let's talk about how we might approach the conversation. We're not just throwing him out there on his own, but he's very clear. If you were to ask him what the odds are that his mother or I are going to go talk to coaches or complain to teachers about something, he'd be like, yeah, that's never going to happen. And he is right. I think that the failure issue is a really big deal in colleges, because so often, as parents, you work really hard so that your kids have great lives and are happy. People talk about kind of privilege, and my wife and I have worked very hard so that my son can be really privileged. And there's nothing wrong with that. On the other hand, when students don't face necessarily kind of natural hardships in their lives, I think it's our job as parents to figure out how to throw some of them in there. Doesn't mean make them miserable, unhappy people. For us, that has been a lot around outdoor activities. Mountain biking is one. We spend a month in Colorado during the summer, and my son was probably about 7, and he came home from a kind of mountain biking camp, and they had taken him up to a trail called 401 in Crested Butte, Colorado, and I was kind of like, whoa, because this is, an hour and a half of steep climb through trails, over tree roots. It's brutal, and I'm like, whoa. And I was so happy when he said, at one point, he was describing this, and he says, and then I sat down and cried. And I'm like, yes, that's what we're paying for. And he was happy. He'd had a great day. You know, would you do it again? Oh, yeah. But in that moment, and if you've been in that moment, you know, when you're doing something and you're not sure you can do it, and you accomplish something. It's been, we sent him a couple of summers ago on a kind of outdoor backpacking program. So he's an incredibly privileged child. That program, however, was way too much fun, and he loved it. Was not particularly hard. So last year we sent him on an outward bound trip, which as a parent is a little frightening when your 14-year-old, you know, flies to the Denver airport, they take the electronics away from them, and then you don't hear from them for 2 weeks. And you have no idea what's going on. When I picked him up at the airport from that experience, and I asked him, gee, you know, would you want to do that again? His answer was, yeah, I don't think so. Because that was a much, much more rigorous, much more challenging experience. Have your children do things, do non-academic things that require independence. You know, this is something that is so easy and so simple, and yet my wife stopped sharing it with her friends because they were horrified. We live in Shaker Heights, which is about 3 blocks off the light rail line, and you know, starting in middle school, we would let him kind of ride the train downtown on his own to meet me at a baseball game or a basketball game or something like that. And we didn't think it was a big deal, except for the number of my wife's friends who were horrified that we would let him do something so dangerous. And we're like, really? You know, at 12 and 13, you know, kids used to do this all the time. You know, kids in big cities, you know, often get on public transportation to go to school. And yet we build these bubbles around our children. Is it possible something could happen? Yeah. But we can't live a completely risk-free life. And when we build that risk-free life around our children, they have to learn how to navigate it often when they go to college. You know, I've been fortunate to work on a couple of urban campuses. And the kids who on day one are comfortable moving around cities, huge advantage in terms of their ability to take advantage of the resource. And, you know, we know on our own campus, most of our students who start their first semester, you know, have never used public transportation to navigate, you know, unless it's been New York City, Washington, D.C., and they haven't had to use it. And so we actually very deliberately give them multiple experiences in the city and on public transportation during their first week on campus to kind of help teach them you can ride the bus. You know, it's okay. You know, having, you know, children travel and fly, you know, on their own. The airlines have gotten to be just chickens about this. I mean, it's horrible. Most major airlines these days, you know, unless you're 15, you have to fly as an unaccompanied minor. Southwest Airlines, however, if you've ever booked your small child on Southwest, it's awesome. Because when you are booking the ticket and it asks, you know, for their birth date and when they're under 15 or 16, it shows you a screen that says, this kid is young. If you think they can't handle it, don't book this ticket. But otherwise, you're cool. And my son last year over President's Day loved his 4-hour layover in Vegas. It was awesome. Work. Have your children do work. Now, I love kind of paid jobs. Families often ask, well, gee, you know, what should Johnny do with the summer? There is nothing wrong with getting a job scooping ice cream. And in my opinion, the worse the job, the better. Because they can learn pretty quickly, whoa, I'm working with people who are adults, and this is what they do to make money to support themselves. I don't want to do this because it's hard. That's good, but it doesn't have to be paid jobs. It can be work around the house. So many of my son's friends don't have regular household responsibilities, which I don't understand. Our friends will say, well, gee, how do you get him to do that? And when he was young and he would say, well, gee, why do I have to empty the dishwasher? Why do I have to do yard work? My question was always, are you part of the family? And he would say, well, yes. And I'd say, okay, that's why. If you don't want to be part of the family, we're good. And when they're 9, being part of the family seems pretty important to them. One of the, I will say as a parent, one of the most wonderful things that I've done with my son are kind of big projects around the house. A couple summers ago, we completely kind of dug out, we took 10 dumpsters, 10 20-yard dumpsters of dirt out of our backyard, built a retaining wall, built a 500 square foot paver patio, fire pit, built-in barbecue. If you're thinking about tackling that kind of project, don't. If I had it to do over again, I'd write the check. But as a father, to be able to do that and create that and work on that with my son is huge. It was physically exhausting, and you learn how to problem solve when you're doing things like that. And what's wonderful is I don't have all the answers. When we ran into problems, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make it work? It's a great opportunity to teach kids about money. What does this cost? What are the various choices that you make? Great project as a father to be able to be involved in with my son. But I also think he's learning things and doing that kind of work that are going to translate into a skill set that is going to be more likely to make him a successful college student and make him a successful adult. Just a couple of other short things, then maybe we've got a few minutes for some questions. Do not overlook what should be obvious in terms of encouraging your children to be kind. Again, that sounds silly, but encourage them to be kind to their peers, encourage them to be respectful of their teachers. We actually know that in the college process. Teachers tell us who, the kids are who are great kids. That's the kind of people we want on our campus because they're going to be somebody's roommate. They're going to be somebody's floor mate. And we worry about that. And the reality is when we have 2 or 3 recommendations that are saying to us, wow, this is a really great kid. This is somebody who is really kind to their friends, who is respectful of faculty. We get lots of strong academic students. You'd be shocked at how few cases we have where we have really, really clear evidence in a file about the kind of person somebody is. And guess who we take? We take the kind one. This last thing in terms of things that we think about in both my work and my wife's work over the years at multiple schools, we see young people who make really bad academic choices. And I'm sure that never happens at Shady Side. Never. Constantly have conversations with your children about cheating. Don't do it. Cheating. It's good that you don't know what that is. I'm serious. There probably is not a week that goes by when I don't reinforce with my son. If you have a choice between taking an F on an exam or an F on a paper and cheating to get a better grade, take the F. I'll respect that. I'm not going to be happy. But going back to the earlier conversation, he is also incredibly clear that his mother and I are not going to be in there defending him and defending his behavior if he has an academic honesty issue. And that's a challenge that we face on college campuses, and the consequences for which, particularly as you get, in high school, the closer you get to graduation, the more consequential the repercussions can be. But it also goes deeper to what kind of person are you going to be. It's not just about, oh, this might hurt you. It goes to who are you at the core? When faced with something hard and you think you won't get caught, you take the easy way out. Or do you face the repercussions for the fact that you didn't study and you didn't prepare? And I constantly, try to reinforce that with examples from my own work. I know with my president, there's one thing that will get me fired. I lie to her, I'm dishonest about something, I will be unemployed. And kind of reinforcing this isn't just about schoolwork, it's about how you approach your life. And so let me just close. The 6 boys in the 14-15 academic year, I don't just mention that to horrify you. Although it is horrific that 6 families lost children that year. But I cannot tell you how present that is in my life as a parent. And how, I wake up every day, go in and wake up my son, and just how much joy that, he's alive. It's another day that I get to spend some time with my son, and we have the same hopes and the same dreams that every parent has for their child. But I think we can lose sight of, that very, very basic, kind of where we all started as parents was, we just want them to be healthy. And then somehow, particularly as we get around the college process, we lose that. And, that year and those 6 boys and those families have really centered me, and I think my wife would say the same thing, on the things that are really, really important in terms of being a parent and in terms of what you hope for your children. So maybe we've got a couple of minutes for some questions. Yes?
Do you see a benefit to either a gap year or a 13th year, and what kind of kids benefit from that?
So we started with my son in probably 6th grade, telling him, you will take a gap year. And our conversation hasn't been, gee, do you want to take a gap year? It has been, what will you do with your gap year? What are the possibilities? And the reason we want him to do this is I think there are tremendous advantages. The kids that we see who take a gap year and do something of substance with that year. A gap year is not hanging out at home. Yeah, we've been very clear, he will not be hanging out at home. But the maturity that a student gains, very often, those students are in a position for a year where they've had to be independent. Our hope is that he will do something where he will be outside the United States for a big part of that time. It broadens students' perspectives. And then when they start college, they know why they're there. They're not just doing it because it's what comes next. They learn focus, they learn maturity, and seeing the benefits of that. We've been talking to him literally since 6th grade, and his first question was, gee, well, why would I do that? And our answer to him was, because you are lucky enough to have a family who can make this possible for you. Why wouldn't you? Can you imagine if I went home this evening and told my wife I was going to take a gap year? Wouldn't go over so well. The older we get, the more responsibilities we have, the fewer choices that we have, and the more compromises there are. And so when you're 18 or 19 years old, absolutely do a gap year.
Just to follow up, so when you do that gap year, when do you apply for college?
You apply for college your senior year. It is a nightmare to try to do a gap year experience and apply to college. Applying to college is actually hard. Harder than it ought to be, one might argue. But it's time consuming, it's complex, and you do it while you're in the school building and you have the support of Lauren and her team to help you through that process. Did I scare all of you?
I don't have a question, but just a comment that this is incredibly refreshing and so timely for me and a lot of the parents of juniors right now. Because I think that when you talk to others, particularly in our environment, where we have good students, successful parents, it gets so stressful that I want to run away screaming. Because people talk about test scores and why are you doing this and you should be doing this, and I find myself just getting so crazy about it, and I have to step away and say, no, I'm not going to be that crazy. And this is just so reaffirming. So thank you.
Well, I'll share a quick story. We create some conflict in other families based on our parenting. So, my wife's the director of college counseling, and a couple times a year, she will arrange for somebody to come in and administer a practice ACT, a practice SAT. And one of my son's friends, a sophomore boy, back in December, his parents, who are good people, good, sane, rational people, except they're crazy. His friend Grant, as a fall sophomore boy, went in and on a Saturday morning took the practice SAT, along with a lot of other sophomore boys, even though it wasn't promoted to that audience, but it was, they weren't prevented from signing up. And Grant got home and was outraged with his parents. If this was a good idea, Kirby Bischoff, whose mother's the college counselor, would have been there in the test. And quite honestly, even if that better thing on that Saturday morning was sitting at home watching Premier League soccer, that's a better use of his time. And so what I would encourage you to do, and I do not want to stand up here as we're wonderful and perfect and low stress. No, we have those crazy moments where you're like, but oh my God, and you've got to kind of talk yourself off that ledge. If you think you're crazy, make a phone call. Because you have counselors who can say, yeah, you're crazy. And when they tell you that you're crazy, it's because they care about you. And it's so easy to get wrapped up in this. Pay attention to who you're listening to. I love that once your kid gets into college, there's a certain number of parents that suddenly become experts on applying to college. And you're just like, okay. And you see this around the different bits and pieces of the college process, essays. Absolutely. Take all the advice you want from people who have never read a real live college essay in their life. Why would you do that? Do you go and see a doctor and say, do you go to your friend and say, oh, your kid was sick. Can you give me some medical advice? No. You go to people who have expertise. And you need to kind of stay with that. Other parents, by and large, are terrible, advisors on the college process, no matter how many children they've put through it, because the world changes. It certainly has changed since I went to college, wildly different. But even over a 5-year period, the world moves. And you've got counselors who actually stay up to date on what's going on. Go to conferences. They visit colleges. They have expertise in these areas. All right, one more.
So I want to make sure I heard right. You actually don't allow your child to use a cell phone at home.
No, not upstairs.
Just not upstairs. He
Not
uses all he
upstairs.
wants downstairs.
Yep, phone stays downstairs.
And what happens when 10 o'clock approaches at night and your son says, I still have a lot more work to do?
That's really rare in our house, and it's not because he doesn't have a lot of homework. It's because we structure his life in such a way that he has time to do that homework. And so there are days, he's a soccer player. And if you have soccer players in your house, you know how crazy that world is, where, you know, they play the fall season for the school, they go directly into their indoor club season, session 1, session 2, and then they have their spring outdoor season. His kind of after-school activity during the winter and spring is outdoor leadership. There's a program Hawkins had for many, many years. It's wonderful because these kids, after school, 4 days a week, they go out and run around in the woods and learn how to build fires and learn how to build shelters. And then they do kind of every season, they do a four-night trip. And so they'll do a winter camping trip. And so right now they're learning all about winter camping and building snow shelters and all of that. But mostly it's kids running around and playing in the woods, building relationships, building cross-gender, cross-age relationships. And there actually aren't a lot of activities where that happens. But, you know, he sits down on Sunday with encouragement and kind of plots out the week of what he has laid out. And if he needs to miss OL so that he can get his homework done, he's going to miss OL. If he has work to do and he can't go to his soccer practice on Monday night or on Thursday night, he's not going to go to soccer practice, because he's not going to go to soccer practice and then be up until 1 o'clock in the morning doing his homework. And that's just not going to happen, because that sleep, you know, his mental health and physical health is more important than that soccer practice. And that's tough. And our answer is, and if that means the coach gives you less playing time, I don't care. You know, because I'm not going to sacrifice that sleep. And I know that I sound crazy, but we see, you know, so many bad effects. And what we're hoping as parents is that, you know, that kind of behavior is, you know, if we create it now, that it's something that will carry over into college. The single most successful, high-achieving, and I've worked with some amazing high-achieving college students over my career, the one thing that they all have in common, they go to bed early. Every single one of them. You know, if I'm standing and talking with somebody, that the uber achievers, they're not up until 3 o'clock in the morning. They're up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they're in bed by 11. Being up till 3 does not create good outcomes. All right, thank you very much.